been a big day for all of us. I think I've already taken the stage with some folks over the course of the last 24 hours. So I don't know when we started this. It was at Sun Pop several years ago, where we started our annual COP roundup of all carbon market developments and outlooks across North America. And this COP is a little different than Dubai COP with the roundup. New insights, new evolutions across the markets in Canada and the US specifically, but also a new backdrop, given what we have seen recently in BC and some possible expectations around very heavy changes potentially in the capital with the new administration and possibly trifecta in BC. But we're not going to get into that quite yet. I want us all to know where we stand with respect to the existing compliant carbon markets and LCFS programs, the Clean Fuels Program, in the US and also Canada. And I have an incredible group of speakers to join me, and also not just compliant. There's a lot of activity that is taking place across the voluntary carbon market in the US and Canada, including voluntary carbon market and just broadly climate disclosure activity, legislation, guidance that folks want to keep a very close watch on. And frankly, it might be more important than ever, certainly in the US context, depending on how the future plays out. So I'm very briefly, I'm not going to go into the incredible bios from each of our panelists. But we are joined by some of truly the best legal minds. Lisa DeMarco, partner, founder of Resilient LLP. We have Nico Van Alstine, partner at Shepherd Mullen. We have JP Brisson, partner at Latham Watkins. And then we have Mel Coulson, carbon engineering. And last but certainly not least, a dear friend and lady who I've just seen for the first time right now because she's been deeply involved in the Article 6 negotiations, is Jackie Mercer. And Jackie Mercer leads up our Carbon Market Bureau in Canada. I say our in Canadian. Carbon Market Bureau in Canada with Environment Climate Change Canada. So beyond the domestic carbon market activity and the regulations, offset protocols, also Jackie is one of the key players for Canada around the Article 6 negotiating table. So with that, I'm going to start with, after this, hopefully if they show Quebec government will be joining for the back end. The Minister of Environment of Quebec, Minister Charest, will be here. And so with that, we are looking at subnationally, very important. Quebec, California, it's the 10th year anniversary of the linkage with these cap and trade systems. We have recently gone through some heavy LCFS stuff, but also the future of California's cap and trade system and Quebec is very much top of mind for 2025. So JP, yes, I'm gonna just tee you up first to just talk about what we are watching for California's Quebec cap and trade system for 2025 with respect to just the amendments, possible amendments that we're looking at, extension, and how critical it really is as a market signal to the private sector.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Katie, for inviting me, and good afternoon, everyone. So it's going to be a big year in California. So two things to keep in mind. First of all, there is an upcoming rulemaking process that ARB will be running. So rulemaking refers to the process whereby existing regulation will be amended. And a rulemaking in California typically takes place in two steps. There's typically a 45-day process followed by a 15-day process, during which the state proposes amendments and the regulated community and stakeholders can provide comments. So we expect, and I'd love to hear Nico's views on this later, but we expect the agency to release a set of proposed changes in the next couple of weeks. And these changes will have, the primary objective of adjusting the trajectory of the cap in order to meet, new ambition set by the California legislature and Senate. There's a couple of key questions that will come up. One of them is whether the state will also try to make some changes to other provisions of the regulations. And we still don't know what to expect on that front. So we'll know better in 3 weeks. So the rulemaking process is a key step this year. Next year, we expect the California legislature and Senate to try to pass legislation to officially extend the cap and trade program from 2030 through 2045 or 2050. And that will require coordination with the government of Quebec, more likely than not. And, I think the big question there is whether there will be any fundamental changes to the cap and trade program going through 2050. One of the potential changes is what will be the role of offsets going forward. There will be more likely than not a significant debate around that. And therefore, this will be something that the market needs to watch.
Thank you, JP, and I appreciate it. Appreciate you keeping it. I appreciate you keeping it, Chris. Microphone situation. I am wondering, Nico, if you could speak to, obviously, 2016, 17, we are still in coalition, but state level activity, we expect it to continue, if not double down. California's program has been litigated several times. And a quick update about just that litigation, where we stand in the kind of the confidence and clarity just in the market. Also, how many mics do you have? All right, thank you so much. So just the history of the litigation, the California program, and I mean, there was the DOJ lawsuit that it's worthwhile just recalling where things stood, but also what's happening beyond the compliance program and what expectations through 2025 is this voluntary carbon market disclosure stuff that has kept us very, very busy, watching intently in Sacramento. And Nico, you've been doing a lot of work with us on that and hopefully preparing guidance around that. So do you want to just give a quick update on that?
Well, Katie, I'm afraid I won't be as crisp as JP because you just asked me to cover a lot of ground there. So first, the history of litigation. California's cap and trade program has been challenged in court, if memory serves, 4 times, and the state program has been upheld each of those times. The first lawsuit was essentially under CEQA and did succeed in delaying implementation for 1 year. It was supposed to come online in 2011 and was delayed to 2012. That was the first one. Then there was a lawsuit that challenged the offsets program within the cap and trade program, and that too was upheld. And then the most significant challenge came to the appellate courts in 2017, and that was a Cal Chamber of Commerce lawsuit that challenged the auctions of allowances as an illegal tax. And that was given a big boost in early 2017. This is right after the Supreme Court reached out and nixed Obama's power plan. And at the same time, the state appellate court, Court of Appeal in California asked for additional briefing. And because the trial court had upheld the program, and everybody thought, okay, it's going to get through. And then the Court of Appeal said, we want more briefing on this. And that sent a shockwave through the market. Those two combined events within weeks of each other sent a shockwave through the market. In the end, thanks to a brief that IETA submitted to the Court of Appeal, the court upheld the program and ruled that it did not constitute an illegal tax, even though the regulation itself says that allowances are not property because they didn't want to risk a takings clause lawsuit. The court held essentially that the allowances have a dual nature, that vis-a-vis the government, they are compliance instruments, an instrument to meet your compliance obligation, but vis-a-vis private parties, they can be property. it's a very interesting case, I think, and is, that principle still the Supreme Court denied appeal, so that stands. I think that that leaves the program in very good stead. I don't think that there's really much risk of the program being challenged in court in California at this point. All aspects of it have now been pretty thoroughly litigated. The DOJ lawsuit that was brought during the Trump administration challenged the linkage with Quebec under a novel constitutional claim. And I intervened in that case as well, and we successfully defeated that lawsuit. And I would very much doubt that that lawsuit could come back under Trump 2.0, just because it's been tried, it's been litigated, and the U.S. government withdrew its appeal when the Biden administration took office. So I very much doubt that either will be litigated. So I think that the program is pretty much safe from a litigation standpoint. The real question, extension beyond 2030. And there too, there are some interesting questions that will come up in the legislature as to whether it needs a 2/3 majority or not. I think it doesn't, but that's an open question. In 2017, the last time the program was extended to 2030, it was a vigorous debate. They insisted upon getting 2/3 majority, which they did, with a lot of backroom deals being struck to ensure that that occurred. And we could see another knockdown, drag out fight, including with offsets again next year. But this year, the two big things are the LCFS and rulemaking that's been touched on in the cap and trade rulemakings. Both of them, these are the two signature programs of California's climate programs, and they both have undergone major overhauls. If they take an approach similar to the cap and trade that they did with LCFS, we can see a lot more than just the overarching theme in both rulemakings, which is to ratchet up ambition by ratcheting down the caps. So that's the major thrust of both of these, but there's going to, as it was with the LCFS, I expect that there will be a lot in the cap and trade rulemaking as well. I think I have other things. Yeah, let's come back to that later.
I think, so this is a nice segue, Lisa, for, oh my gosh, there's so many things, but you straddle many jurisdictions. You live in Canada with us, know Canada like the back of your hand, but also in the US, and given the current context and what we're witnessing, could witness. What about trade, competitiveness? What is something that could actually be inevitable, even if we see US blood of Paris, right? Why is everybody still and should be very much watching what's occurring on potentially the trade front in NAFTA, North America?
Thanks, Katie. Let me just first do a shout out in terms of Nico's work on the case in California regarding the offsets tax and as property. It's a very beautiful, from a lawyer's perspective, it's very elegant law. So there, that's a shout out for Nico. In relation to what Katie's talking about, I think there's an inevitability. We've all watched the election very carefully and seen the campaign promises around enhanced border tariffs and way to implement an agenda with border tariffs would be to do so through the form of a border carbon adjustment. And noteworthy that there are two now existing US bills on the table. One of them has been brought forward by two Republicans and is quite popular on a bipartisan basis. We see as an inevitability a border carbon adjustment based on environmental product disclosures, not necessarily based on price, but emissions intensity of goods coming into play as popular, bipartisan, and fairly prominent. And there have been a lot of issues coming forward and a lot of attractiveness in the North American market, where 70% of Canada's trade is with the US. Fairly high percentage of US trade is with Canada, that this might be something to look out for, that there isn't an unintended or perverse consequence of catching your main trade partner in an associated border carbon adjustment. And secondly, facilitating trade to do things that might actually have a climate beneficial impact that are consistent, that is consistent among the jurisdictions, very specifically in and around carbon capture and storage, direct air capture, the shared airshed becomes very important. And a lot of the activities that are currently funded under the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, they have very important cross-border impact.
Sorry about the microphone situation. Yes, thank you. I'm wondering, we didn't really touch 45Q, and then we'll go to Kel and Jackie, but JP, maybe just quickly looking at the IRA and prospects for the IRA, and what is a done deal and what is very much at risk. Do you mind sharing some of the insights you shared earlier today on the panel I was on?
Sure. So I think no one knows for sure, but I think it's probably not right to think about the IRA as one program, right? So the IRA has multiple individual programs, some of which may be more at risk, right? So, for example, you may have read that the offshore wind component of the IRA may be at risk, right? Because of the political realities. The EV, components of the IRA is subject to question because obviously Mr. Musk played a significant role in the Trump election. So, the big question is whether the 45Q, 45E, which are the support mechanism for CCS, hydrogen, and other technologies, including direct air capture, will remain, right? So there is a view that because a lot of these support mechanisms have gone directly to states that are majority Republican, that they should stay. There's also an argument that since these mechanisms essentially support U.S. Energy independence and U.S. fossil fuel companies, that they are likely to stay. So we will have to see what happens. But my view is that more likely than not, Mr. Trump will continue those programs going forward. I think that the hope is that, Mr. Trump, the Trump administration will keep these incentives in place and, streamline the permitting process. Right now in the US, one of the most significant challenge to deploying CCS and DAC technologies at scale is the fact that there are significant permitting delays associated with these projects. Hopefully, under a Trump administration, these delays can be, overcome, and that would be a significant boost to the energy transition industry in the US.
Can you pass the mic to Jackie? We're going to go north of the border. So in Canada, we actually just had 3 provincial elections, some national elections, all in October. We are also going to have an election at some point before October 2025, federally, which perhaps quite sooner than October 2025. But I'm not going to ask Jackie about the political dynamic, don't worry. What I do want to ask Jackie about, just objectively, is the hard work that the Carbon Market Bureau is undertaking and the status of the federal compliance offsets program. Because frankly, I don't think it gets as much attention as it deserves. Hopefully it's getting some uptake at COP. But where do things stand, Jackie? Again, you oversee the team that's developing the protocols. What exists have already been published, right? What should we be watching for through end of year, early 2025? And I think that there are some really important, novel, unprecedented potentially in like a compliance national context. So why don't you just give a quick update?
Sure, thanks, Katie, and thanks for not putting me on the spot on anything too political. So we launched the federal GHG offset system back in 2022, and so this program was designed to complement our federal carbon pricing system and provide those large regulated emitters with another source of lower cost compliance flexibility options. And to date, we've actually published 3 protocols. So building on a lot of the experience that we've seen in California, Quebec, and Alberta, We published a landfill methane recovery and destruction, a protocol on reducing greenhouse gases from refrigeration systems. So a bit different than ODS, more focused on those high GWP refrigerants, and also recently improved forest management on private lands. And so in total, we have 30 registered projects to date. So 1 landfill, 28 refrigeration protocols, kind of clustered into 3 aggregations. And just recently, a big forestry project registered in Northern Ontario. We are expecting our first sort of credit generation or credit issuance to happen probably early 2025. So our rules require projects to be registered for a full year before they come in and ask and with their project reporting. So yeah, we will see credits, federal offset credits in the market early 2025, we hope, being traded and used by industry for compliance under the output-based pricing system, but not limited to that. So the oil and gas emissions cap regulation that was just published, I guess a couple weeks ago, will also allow the use of federal offset credits as a compliance tool, and also it being considered under the clean electricity regulation. So the other policies, the federal government are seeing these credits as representing, 1 ton of CO2 equivalent and being used for other compliance purposes. So I guess in the pipeline, there's lots of protocols coming, and really where we see this program fitting within, there's a million different policies and programs that the federal government has launched, which is great, targeting different things. And really the offset system is trying to get at those reductions and removals that aren't already incentivized by carbon pricing, covered by regulation, or business as usual common practice. So we're focusing on the ag sector. So we've got reducing, let me just get this right in one day, reducing enteric GHG emissions from beef cattle. So that protocol was published in draft here at COP last year. We spent a year sort of working with industry, the ag sector, and hope to publish a final shortly. Then we've got, I guess, our big ticket item that we've been working on for a long time. So direct air carbon dioxide capture and storage. So this protocol will be one of the first compliance protocols published. And we've worked really hard with industry, with our natural resources department, as well as the provinces and territories on this protocol. It is challenging because it's sort of the first in Canada. A lot of the underlying CCS frameworks are led by the provinces. But we're hopeful to get that out. Hopefully, fingers crossed, and before the end of the year, but if not, within the coming weeks. We've also got another protocol focused on reducing manure methane emissions through anaerobic digestion or other treatments. So this again focused on the ag sector and really gonna leave the door open to not just sort of anaerobic digestion, but other forms of treatment to reduce methane emissions, as that's a big priority for the government. And 2 final ones that are going to take a little bit longer, but we think they are really important still. One is enhanced soil organic carbon. So this has been underway, the development has been underway for a couple of years now. We are working on sort of the modeling, measurement sort of interface, getting feedback on how you demonstrate permanence or how you achieve sort of equivalence. And so hopefully we'll be able to report back on a timeline on that one shortly. And then the final protocol that we're really proud of and that we just kicked off is improved forest management on public and crown lands. So this project type we feel is really important to help facilitate and lead to Indigenous reconciliation, economic reconciliation, to help facilitate projects on our crown lands and forests. So we released a discussion paper in the summer with a bunch of questions asking about how to best facilitate these types of projects, how to demonstrate consent, how to ensure authorization, how to ensure entitlement to the credit. So the comment period just wrapped up with, I think, Monday. I was here, but we received comments from provinces, stakeholders, Indigenous community, all sorts of interested stakeholders. So really excited to unpack that one. And yeah, so that's the status of all things federal elections.
Yeah, it's a lot going on. It's a lot happening, and hopefully, and we don't know what the political situation will look like nationally as we head through 2025 in Canada. But there is a lot of industry support, community support, local, like Indigenous involvement. There's provincially the coordination, right? Maybe not the province's federal government don't coordinate on everything, but there seems to be like hyper coordination across these instruments and protocols. So we shall watch this space. And I think if we just go, we'll have a bit more of a discussion after, and I can open to the floor. but hell, Canada success story with carbon engineering, like true Canada success story on direct air capture. And now in the US, Stratus, biggest DAC plant in the world. Tell us about like the enabling kind of frameworks that you're seeing, including on the clean fuel side, you can say, because that, you know, was a big one that propped it up. And just what is the outlook for carbon engineering and the constituents, I guess, within your orbit over the next few months into the next year?
Yes, it's always great to be able to talk about Canada being a success story. So for those that might not be familiar, we've been working on direct air capture as part of carbon engineering since 2009. So, sorry, we've been working on direct air capture at carbon engineering since 2009. So we're a long time player in trying to get direct air capture to commercial. So we commissioned our pilot plant in 2015 in Squamish. And then with proof of concept, we went to our innovation center. Our innovation center is our longtime R&D facility in Squamish. We have 150 engineers that are working on our technology to bring the cost of capture down. The data from our innovation center that we gathered in 2021 informed the build of our first commercial plant. So our technology is developed in Canada, but our first commercial plant is being deployed in Texas. And when it's commissioned in 2025, it will be the largest direct air capture plant at 0.5 megaton per year. What's really important is that in the United States, California's LCFS allowed direct air capture as a compliance pathway. So that was the first signal in 2019. I'm looking at the lawyers in the room to get my dates right. And that gave the signal that we're going to have a market to be able to move our credits into. Between the time that 2019 goes forward to the IRA gives us $180 US per ton to sequester. So that's why we're deploying in the United States. But it's really important because at some point, direct air capture, you want it to go where it makes sense. And for us, it's where we have good geological sequestration, as well as the ability to build out electricity. And so for us to be able to build where a plant makes the most sense from an efficiency standpoint, and then move our credits into the market is really powerful. So also, we've had huge support from the federal government in terms of the support for our research and development facility, getting loans for that, as well as the ITC in Canada. So there's great signals in Canada as well. And then also I'd want to give a shout out to British Columbia, which is our home province. But British Columbia has the British low carbon fuel standard. And at one point it was trading at about $350 US per ton last year. It started to obligate aviation, and it allows direct air capture as a compliance pathway. And so you're really starting to see these markets develop where that price point, as our costs come down, it makes a lot of sense for us to be able to move into those subnational markets and really add value to being able to help those sectors decarbonize.
Cal, thank you. Because I want to, again, we've been here before about some nationals taking charge on both sides, Canada and the US, right? And I recognize that Mexico is very much a part of North America. We do not have a Mexico speaker, but if you look at what's happening in Mexico, a lot of the activity, it is Querétaro, Tamaulipas, right? Like it is at that subnational level in Mexico as well. But what are just the expectations? I mean, what also happened on November 5th election, but the Washington State Cap and Invest program ballot initiative, which is absolutely vital, and which for us is sigh of relief, right? Because that could be another partner to the program. So, Nico, we're going to come back. The other thing beyond compliance, subnational level, is the voluntary side. Again, it becomes more important than ever. So let's talk about Sacramento specifically right now on legislation for the BCM.
Okay, let's try this again. Yeah, there's a lot of activity in California, and I expect that that's not going to go away. The most importantly, on the voluntary carbon credit side in California, actually in 2023, the legislature adopted AB 1305, which requires disclosures of both the marketing and selling of voluntary carbon credits and their use in claims made by companies. And that actually technically went into force in 2024, January 1 of this year. Although the author officially stated in a letter that's in the record that intended it to go into effect in January 1, 2025. Importantly, the enforcement mechanism for that is basically district attorneys, county attorneys that can bring lawsuits under it, challenging a company's disclosures with regard to either the marketing and selling of voluntary carbon credits or claims made about their use. There's a lot of ambiguity in AB 1305. There are a lot of open questions that have really troubled the folks. Because frankly, when it was developed in 2023, there was no dialogue with anybody in the industry about it. And so the folks that wrote it, they were unfamiliar with the market. Let's just put it that way. In 2024, there was the cleanup bill that was negotiated, and that this time around, the market participants, including IETA, were very much actively involved. And we got the bill greatly improved. Unfortunately, in the last day of the legislature, the bill died, and so it was not adopted. So we are stuck with 1305. And remember, it is technically in force now, although thus far all the DAs have respected that the intended deadline is 2025. So what's to be done about this? As the subnationals step up, we're still in 2.0, the other major focus now is going to be in the voluntary carbon market. And there's a real call to ensure that ambitions persist and carry on in that area. We need private finance now more than ever. So in order to enable that to occur, we need to ratchet up the integrity of that market so that there is confidence, so that buyers and those making claims will not be subject to greenwashing lawsuits. We're facing a crisis here of green hushing, and we need to provide the kind of assurance that the credits that they purchase and make claims about are going to not be subject to lawsuits, such as by DAs under 1305. And sorry to do this, but I predict that we will see lawsuits in 2025. An NGO, Carbon Plan, recently published a report in which they reviewed all of the 1305 disclosures that they could find, all of 25, in the year 2024. And they found that only six of those 25 disclosure programs by both marketers and sellers and users met all the requirements of 1305 in their view. So in their view, a lot of them were incomplete or made disclosures about low quality voluntary carbon credits. You can expect certain DAs will pick up on that and will take action in 2025. So what can we do about that to ensure that high integrity offsets are not subject to lawsuits of this kind, or if they are, that they prevail? One thing that we can do is to provide, because what I like to call quasi-regulation or informal regulation, which is market guidance from trusted trade associations. You have your Better Business Bureau for so many other areas of the economy. If we can provide that kind of neutral, industry-wide trade association kind of guidance, then I think that courts and district attorneys will look to such guidance when evaluating the potential claims about particular disclosures, and could be very influential in separating the wheat from the chaff, the high quality from the low quality. And so there's an opportunity here for the market informally, as with the ACVCM and the DCMI, to provide standards that then regulators and courts might look to in the absence of governments taking action themselves to provide regulatory guidance for the voluntary carbon market. If the market itself collectively can provide that kind of guidance, then that could serve as guidance that courts could rely upon and thereby provide protection against greenwashing lawsuits. And that could serve to increase the confidence that we need in the market to address the crisis. Those subject to 1305 are, on the one hand, marketers and sellers of voluntary carbon credits in California. Now, what does that mean? Marketers mean you have a website, it's accessible in California, you're subject. That's pretty big clear that the courts are going to take that view. In terms of those that use them and make claims about them, it's really anybody that uses them and makes claims about them. So, Microsoft purchases offsets. As part of their net zero ambitions, they will need to make disclosures about them and be subject to lawsuits if they don't meet those requirements.
Good.
you know, as you say, a part of this is the language is so vague, right? That's the challenge. So like, I can't emphasize it enough how important this is. Certainly to the business community, right? This is really, really important. It's also relatively nascent that this has occurred, you know, 1305, and then the cleanup. Like, this is all within the last year or so. And something similar is going on north of the border, right, with C-59 and the anti-greenwashing. Do you want to just quickly mention that? And let's get what happens in Sacramento, similar to Brussels, right? It gets exported. So this is not just a California situation that other jurisdictions aren't looking at or will soon be looking at to possibly replicate or adapt. So Canada, and that kind of came fast and furiously as well.
It did, and effectively, it seems as though there was a well-meaning environmental NGO strategy to enhance disclosures, and it had the net impact of really, really stopping and inhibiting progressive climate actions. So from that perspective in Canada, as part of a budget bill, similar to many other jurisdictions, Bill C-59, as it's now known, there was legislation implemented. It is now in force. I want to emphasize that point. It is now in force that prohibits any claim or representation relating to an environmental benefit if that claim or representation is not supported by two things: an internationally recognized methodology or adequate and proper testing. We do not have guidance yet on what an internationally recognized methodology is or what adequate and proper testing constitutes. So from that perspective, it's particularly challenging. By way of anecdote, one of our associates spent 10 weeks looking at every line of a financial institution's website, every click-through, every marketing document, every public advertisement, anything that was public facing. And things like, we are planting trees to help the environment, can no longer be said because there is not adequate and proper testing, or we don't know what that is. And secondly, we don't know if it can be attached with or associated with an internationally recognized methodology. So this unintended consequence was any claims or actions or good disclosures, that transparency that you want to see from many organizations has been hushed. And we're seeing pullback very significantly. So it's not all for naught. We expect further guidance from the Competition Bureau, disguised as a consumer protection initiative and a competition antitrust initiative. We expect that guidance to be forthcoming, but the law is currently in force, and there's a citizen's right of action associated with that law that comes into force in June of 2025. So lots of activity that is going on to very strategically be compliant with the law, but the net effect is we're losing the disclosure and transparency that we had hoped to see in the marketplace.
And just to be like, that's environmental claims broadly, right? So they're not, what Nico was referencing in California, you have the voluntary carbon market specific voluntary offsets disclosure requirements. This is writ large environmental claims, but there's, you know, a big component related to the offsets.
Very targeted at climate change. Very, very targeted at climate change.
Do compliance, just quickly, compliance offsets, so they say?
Not right now.
Thanks, yeah. So, Jackie, did you know?
Just one footnote, the California law does not include a private attorney general provision. So in California, there won't be a basis for private causes of action, only those by district attorneys. But DAs have already taken a number of similar filed similar lawsuits, so I won't be surprised.
Do you have any questions from the audience? Comments? Reaction? Thanks.
Thank you so much, everyone. This was This is helpful. My name is Naeem Merchant. I'm the Executive Director of Carbon Removal Canada, the policy think tank focused on advocating for carbon removal policies in Canada. I'm struck by some of the challenges that were mentioned, feel like they stem from just a lack of clear definitions of what we're actually talking about. And I'm wondering where we can find or where we should be directing our energy to get clear definitions on things. So something like tree planting helping the environment is true. I think we can all agree that it does. But the lack of definition can make it seem like something like direct air capture that removes CO2 from the atmosphere in a measurable and permanent way is seen as the same as tree planting, because we're creating offsets around both of these sorts of things. So how can we find, I guess, greater clarity around what makes each of these sorts of things different, so that we can avoid some of the challenges we're seeing with C59, but also ensure that if we can see direct air capture in compliance programs in the future, that there's actually some uptake there because it's seen as something that's different, for example, than simply planting trees.
Start with the Canadian context, and where you can see some definition first and foremost is from the Bureau. We do expect them to hopefully very quickly. Their target deadline is December 31st. I think the Bureau is finding that an ambitious deadline to provide more guidance of what is and is not an internationally recognized methodology. By all accounts, we would assume, not safely right now, that a regulation constitutes an associated evidence of an internationally recognized methodology and or adequate and proper testing. But the test itself has several layers. I won't go into all of them, but one of them is causative. It has to be a causal thing. So it can't just be ancillary. So the Bureau itself is the one to look to, but also international organizations like the International Standards Organization, like the ICBCM, we're encouraging them very much so to submit to the Bureau to say, we are an internationally recognized methodology. Please include us in your positive list of what is an internationally recognized methodology.
I think there is a possibility for some guidance from the state of California in this regard as well. I didn't touch on it, but California also in 2023 adopted carbon disclosure requirements for companies, similar to the SEC rule, but farther reach because it includes private companies as well. There's a threshold of 500,000 in size for the climate risk disclosures and 1 billion for the GHG emissions disclosures. So it's 1 and 2 and 3 coming online in 2027. And as is typical in California's climate legislation, it's pretty much of a framework and then a lot of authority given to ARB, the Air Resources Board, to work out the details in regulation. And those regulations were extended this year for these bills to July 1, 2025. So by that deadline, ARB is supposed to issue regulations with regard to SB 253, the GHG disclosures. And it's not necessary, but it's likely that they will take up both the climate risk under SB 261 as well as 253. And so we could get the guidance on 261 in the second half of 2025. They can give themselves an extension. We will. But right now, they're on track for late 2025 to have that guidance. Here's the catch. SB 261 has a provision in it that says that the ARB essentially can provide guidance as to what it considers meritorious climate risk mitigation plans. That opens the door for ARB to say, we think that these particular offset protocols and programs meet our threshold for adequate disclosures. And so it's an opportunity for ARB to indirectly endorse standards that might be issued by, for example, the ICBCM's CCPs. I have spoken with senior folks at ARB. That idea has gotten some traction, so stay tuned on that. So we might yet get actual regulatory guidance, not regulation, but guidance as to what would constitute the kind of definitions that you're talking about.
Well, one thing I would like to note is that I think for a very long time, the carbon industry, you know, as generally defined, was trying to stay mostly unregulated, right? Now, I think what's changed over the last 2 years is that as a whole, you know, more and more market participants would welcome regulation to bring more stability into the market. Now, of course, you know, bad regulation is not a good thing. And I think what's happening is that as we are seeing opportunities to create legislation or regulation, it's very important to be proactively engaging with the lawmakers to make sure that what comes out is what we need as a group and as a market. I do have a question for Jackie, which is I was fascinated by everything you described in terms of, you know, what Canada is doing with respect to creating a domestic offset program. My question for you, Jackie, is it possible to do an offset project in Canada using some of these protocols and then getting a letter of approval from the Canadian government to convert those credits into Article 6.4 credits that can then be used internationally under the Paris Agreement?
Great question. Before I answer that, I do just want to circle back to your point, Lisa, and just note that in the development of our system overall, and to be determined with the guidance that comes out, but we have the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act does give the authority to develop regulations to establish our offset system. So then our offset system was established through regulations. And each protocol, it's like kind of right up front, is based on ISO 14064 Part 2, which is an internationally recognized standard for the development of project methodologies and various things. Our verification standards require 14064 Part 3, and for verification bodies to be accredited to 14065. So I think in the ecosystem that we've set up, there is sort of a variety of regulations and as well as international standards that we've relied on. So hopefully that will calm some fears maybe in the audience. To your point, so currently the government of Canada has not taken any decisions as to whether or not it will use Article 6 or authorize any credits to leave. So right now, that would be like a bilateral agreement under Article 6.2, actually, if there were credits that were generated under our offset system and that they were to be bought and used for another country's NDC. But I did want to note that as part of the oil and gas emissions cap regulation that was just recently published, we have committed to further consultation on sort of an offset fund, the merits and the design, as well as whether or not to allow GitMos to be used for compliance. And we do hope to kick off that consultation in the coming months. So that would be really the first signal that Canada is exploring how Article 6 could be used, but it would be more credits coming in as opposed to credits being at the stage.
Do you want to add, and then we're going to wrap. Is Prime Minister of Quebec on that side? Oh, okay. I do want Lisa to just say a few words. Article 6, Canada, opportunity. And it was Dubai last year where it was Resilient and IETA and Public Policy Forum, which is a think tank in Canada, that released Article 6, opportunities. What was it? Not the missing ingredient. Anyway. What are you watching through the lens of just an Article 6 expert? Obviously, like you are deeply involved in these negotiations, some prospects and really the opportunity that could be squandered by Canada if it doesn't hopefully move forward. And no pressure, Jackie, but from an independent legal expert's perspective.
Yeah, I think there's a very significant message, particularly to the subnationals in Canada, that there's extraordinary opportunity from some of the activities in energy producing provinces that would be squandered if, in particular, they moves not to participate in the Paris Agreement, or they attempted to step back their activities in carbon pricing. And very bluntly, I'll speak to Alberta. I think the fact that Alberta has had a carbon price in place since 2007 and has had a ratcheting down of emissions associated with that, and has had, as a result of some of those regulations, the best global results on methane reductions that give rise to a number of Canada's positions. It would be ill-advised to step away from carbon pricing. So what we're watching very specifically is some of the rules and regulations that have come out under Article 6.4, but more specifically, the key issue of authorizations in the rule book. So even before Canada gets there, what are the rules around authorizations in Article 6.2 and Article 6.4? They should broadly be parallel and similar. There's a little additional item of authorizations in Article 6.4 related to unauthorized units. So how do we step out those unauthorized units? But things like, when does it happen? How does it happen? How do you potentially amend them? Are they subject to revocation, which is not good from a market perspective? And what are the circumstances in which we can evidence, report, and sequence the reports of those authorizations? I think very, very, very important. So we're watching that very, very closely. And we do have some interesting guidance that came out from the Article 6.4 supervisory body, and we're watching how that gets implemented in the context of the COP decision framework, not just in the supervisory board, but how that plays out in subsequent CMA decisions as well. So that's a quick summary.
Are there any final questions or comments from the audience? Because I think then what we'll do is, unless there are there any final burning comments from the panelists, this is we cannot waste this opportunity with these brains here today. And Cal,
I'm very grateful that this panel gave me a law degree. I think is the takeaway I have from sitting with these lawyers. But I just wanted to take, when we hear about all of the headwinds that we're facing as an industry, whether it comes to disclosure, just wanting to reemphasize that, as a technology provider and now a product developer, this will get in the way of us being able to deploy if we don't get clarity on the demand and continue to increase demand, whether it's compliance markets or getting clarity in the PCM. So you have this technology that, 8 years ago, people thought was science fiction. We're building the plant, it turns on next year, and we don't want this to have it grind to a halt. So kind of my call to action is, if we don't figure this out, then we will not be able to deploy things like direct air capture or other novel technologies nearly at the speed that we need to be able to meet the targets.
Katie, if it's all right, I just would like to lay a stink bomb here at the end. And that is, as I mentioned before, I don't think that there's a risk of litigation directly against the cap and trade program, but there is one potential major problem that I see with the new administration. And note that right after the election, Governor Newsom said that the incoming legislature would be a special session to trump California's laws. And President-elect Trump responded immediately on Truth Social. And so these two have a history of sparring, and we can expect more of that. Here's an opportunity for them to spar. Waivers under the Clean Air Act. California's laws that regulate emissions are subject to preemption by the federal law, the Clean Air Act. When that act was adopted, it recognized that California was already doing this, it was ahead of the federal government, so we put in place provisions that essentially automatically gave a waiver to the state for its laws that could be more strict than that of the federal government, and then other states could follow California if they so chose. And for years and years, that was pro forma. In fact, over 100 waivers have been issued by the federal government. Bush 2, when AB 32 was adopted, issued the first EPA denial of those waivers. And that was litigated. California challenged it, and it was pending before the U.S. Supreme Court when the Obama administration came in. And the Obama administration withdrew the case and entered into a settlement agreement between EPA and California. So everybody kind of lost attention. That issue went away. Well, it's not gone away. There are currently seven waiver petitions filed by the state for different climate programs pending before US EPA. US EPA could deny those. That could then be litigated, and we could be back before the Supreme Court, the very different Supreme Court, on those. In addition to that, the Clean Air Act, this isn't constitutional, this is statutory law. The Republican won a trifecta. They won both houses of the legislature in Congress. There are already 3 bills that would modify the Clean Air Act to do away with that waiver provision. If they really wanted to go nuclear and really attack California's climate programs, they could amend that law and start denying waivers, and that could really undercut the ability of the state to advance its programs, as I said mentioned. So I like to think that that risk is out there, and that it's a remote risk, but I think we need to be aware of it because this is likely to be litigated in both the political arena in the legislature and in the courts, and we need to be prepared. Wait. So speaking of another, yeah, I think we do. So Lisa asked me to mention the status of the Chevron doctrine. Well, the Chevron doctrine is RIP. That's the status. Now we definitely need to bring the Loper Bright decision. Well, first of all, I do want to caution the Loper Bright decision, which overturned the Chevron decision, which requires deference to federal agencies' interpretation of federal law. It's not as black and white as it's often portrayed in the press. It does give agencies that have long established practices of interpreting a federal law, that kind of practice will be given deference under Loper Bright. But what we do have, without question, is it's an open question. The court affirmed one of the bedrock decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court in Marshall that the Supreme Court gets to decide ultimately what a statute means and what the Constitution means. And therefore, if you disagree with an agency's interpretation of a federal law, you can file a lawsuit and force a judge to decide. And the judge has the authority to decide under Loper Bright now, very clearly. They won't defer to an agency blanketly. They will in many instances. So it's got a lot. What does that mean? It means a heck of a lot of chaos is what it really means, because we have a diverse bunch of judges out there, and some of them are going to give more deference to agencies than others. So, and that could come into play when we have cases interpreting the Clean Air Act and EPA and ARB's interpretation.
I actually wanted to end on a positive note. There's the other side of that interpretation. So if a very different EPA makes decisions that have the impact of negatively rolling back some climate provisions, you now have the ability under the changes to the Chevron doctrine to challenge those as well. So I think the short answer is we're going to be in court a lot, but it's not all that.
So the lawyers will be really, really busy. But thank you for the pro bono time. There were lots of nuggets. I'm talking lots of nuggets that were dropped for the last hour. Okay. And I'm really thrilled for the hardcores who were able to stick around, but also for those virtually that are listening. Again, this has been recorded. And a lot of this is, quite fresh and still ascertaining what the future potentially has in store. Instead of a stink bomb, well, and again, on more of a brighter note, that the subnationals are still in. As you might have seen, the U.S. pavilion isn't nearly as big. You also don't have a lot of the U.S. subnational delegates here today or here this week in Baku. Expect that to change quite dramatically as we head through Bellum next year, and also the U.S. corporate side. But also international trade, and as you said, the competitiveness piece, border carbon adjustments, lots to watch, and on the voluntary carbon market bit. I could go on, but I'll stop. We didn't even talk about the regional greenhouse gas initiative in New York. We could do that over a drink. I want everybody to put their hands together. A very warm round of applause for our speakers. Thank you, Kel. Thank you, JP, Nico, Lisa. Thank you so much, not only for this panel,
but for all that you're doing across these markets in North America. So important. Thanks all. Enjoy a drink. It's right next door. It should be with, I think, Quebec government is there.